Co-workers, family, and friends are mourning the deaths of 150 people after their plane crashed in the French Alps. Coming up here on Fox 4 News at 9, we talk to airline disaster response expert Ken Jenkins on what's next for the airline. There was no Mayday alert from the pilot of the German jetliner that crashed in the French Alps. It is believed all 150 people on board were killed. Tonight, the town of Haltern, Germany, gathered to mourn the deaths of the 16 students on board that flight. Aviation investigators are currently examining the cockpit voice recorder from the Germanwings airliner run by Lufthansa. The plane was flying from Spain to Germany when it went down. Shortly after it reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, it started this long descent, going down to 6,000 feet in about 10 minutes. And that's when it lost contact with air traffic control, crashing into the side of a mountain.
All resources have been put in place to understand the circumstances of the accident and to recover the victims.
Germanwings says the last routine checkup on that plane took place yesterday.
Disaster response is something Ken Jenkins does for a living. He's an airline consultant, most recently with the disasters at Malaysia Airlines, so he knows firsthand what these things are like. All right, Ken, I'm going to ask you just your initial response or feelings about this latest crash and what you thought of it, hearing about it.
I think, like most people, I'm very shocked and saddened to hear that another aircraft has gone down in just a matter of months, and 150 people were killed, especially when there are children and infants on board.
Yeah, it's awful. Let me ask you some uncomfortable questions that are uncomfortable to me, but I do want to ask them. Since you work with Malaysian Airlines, particularly the one that's still not been accounted for, is there, and it's awful and terrible, but down the road, is there some level of comfort knowing that this plane went down and finding it, even though it's disastrous consequences, as opposed to never knowing possibly what really happened?
Well, certainly the consequences of each accident are different. If we can consider Malaysia 370 an accident at this point. But for the families of the Germanwings accident, they're not going to endure for a year that not knowing what happened to my loved one. They've seen TV, they have an idea of what's happened, and now they're going to be able to move on through integrating this accident into their lives.
Let me ask you something. Is there, and this is where you come in, I think, is there a way to take something terrible, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but make it less terrible, make it less so?
Sure, there are a lot of things that the airline itself can do to make things a little less traumatic and or stressful for the families. And Germanwings and its parent company Lufthansa Airlines are doing a good job so far of doing that. And that's being able to and allowing the family members of those impacted to come to as close to the accident site as possible. And they've set up a command center in Dusseldorf where the families can meet privately outside of the public and outside of the media, where they can be briefed on what's going on. And depending on how things go over the next few days and maybe into the week, get them closer to the accident site. But based on the wreckage,
so it makes them feel better to be part of the process?
To be part of it. There's an innate feeling, a sense that family members want to be as close to where their loved one died as possible. And if you look at Malaysia 370, they haven't had that opportunity, where the Germanwing family members will have that opportunity.
Talk a little bit about regional carriers. I mean, I think in the United States, maybe we're not as familiar with kind of what this plane is a part of and other things in Europe and stuff.
Well, they're set up very similarly to what you see in the United States. Like, for example, American Airlines has a number of feeder carriers like American Eagle and others that feed into their hubs. United Airways does the same thing. In Europe and in Asia, they have a similar thing. Like Lufthansa Airlines has the parent company, which many people have heard of. Germanwings is the smaller version, low-cost carrier. The only main difference is they fly larger aircraft than the U.S. regional carriers do.
Do you find anything similar in the Malaysia airline crashes you've worked with in this one? Anything that you would advise airlines to focus on this, do this, here's what you need to do now? Any learning points out of both?
You know, particularly with Malaysia 370, Steve, and I think with any accident, the key thing, the number one thing that family members want in the aftermath of an accident is information.
No doubt.
They want to know what happened. They want to know when they're going to get their loved one back, when they're going to be able to bury their loved one. And if you have information, particularly as the airline or the investigative agency, it's key that you're transparent, you provide that information to families. But
with Malaysia, it felt like they were saying stuff they didn't know. And that's worse, right? If you start putting stuff out there that's not true, you don't know what you're talking about, that's damaging.
You don't want to speculate. And that, at the same time, for Germanwings, there's so much speculation going on today, of course, in the media as well, that the families don't know what's right and what's wrong. So they're looking to the actual on-scene investigators to get that information so that they can assimilate and then integrate this event into their lives.
Okay, Ken Jenkins has a new book out. A week old? Something like that?
Just a few days.
A few days, less than a week. Called Resilience, based on his experiences with families, you know, survivors, non-survivors, and even the investigators. A lot of good interviews in here.
Yes,
a lot of conversations, personal experiences, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, Resilience. Stories of courage and survival in aviation disasters. Ken, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.